Welcome back to another explainer. Today, we're unpacking something literally all of us experience, but, we rarely actually talk about it. We're looking at the sheer, exhausting volume of our own minds. If you've ever felt like your brain is running a marathon that you absolutely didn't sign up for, and you just desperately want to find a moment of peace, well, you are in the exact right place.
So why won't your mind stop moving? Seriously, have you ever felt like there's just this constant quiet storm of thoughts sitting right behind your eyes? It's like this relentless hum that you just can't seem to escape, even when the room is completely pin-drop silent and you're just begging yourself to be present.
Okay, let's dive into this, because I know for a fact we have all been here. It's 2 a.m., right? Your body is physically exhausted, but your brain suddenly decides, hey, this is the perfect time to replay that one really embarrassing conversation you had like 10 years ago. It is deeply, deeply frustrating. But before we start judging ourselves, we really need to understand what this noise actually is.
In the psychology world, they call this inner speech. Basically, it's verbalized thoughts directed at yourself or some specific facet of your life. Like, when you're rushing out the door, you can't find your keys anywhere, and you just yell out, I can't do anything right. That is a completely normal form of inner speech. We all narrate our lives every single day. But why does it sometimes just spiral completely out of our control?
Section 1. Where the noise begins. Evolution and childhood.
Believe it or not, our brains are actually hardwired for this constant buzzing hum. Literally thousands of years ago, overthinking was purely a survival mechanism. Our ancient ancestors stayed alive by constantly listening out for predators in the dark. Fast forward a bit to the 1930s, and we have psychologist Lev Vygotsky. He theorized that children talking out loud to themselves is actually how they practice managing their emotions. But now, we're in the modern digital age, and that ancient survival radar is just utterly overloaded. We're constantly bombarded by screens, endless notifications, and the heavy weight of social judgment.
And what's really fascinating here is how that early childhood development can completely shift into overdrive. Imagine a quiet child growing up in an unpredictable home. They learn super early on how to just read the tension in a room. Before they can even put a name to an emotion, they're basically studying the air, trying to predict the next argument. And they adapt to this by becoming hypervigilant. They're just constantly scanning the world for data to keep themselves safe.
So, the absolute crucial point to grasp here is this. Overthinking is not born as intellect, it's born as instinct. For that hypervigilant child, the mind essentially becomes a shield. To protect yourself from all that emotional uncertainty, you basically build a fortress out of logic and analysis. Feelings turn into these little puzzles that have to be solved, and thought itself becomes your only real, safe refuge.
Let's move on to Section 2, the science of the spiral and your brain on overdrive.
So biologically speaking, a lot of this comes down to something called the default mode network. Now, for most people, this specific part of the brain actually quiets down when they're at rest. But for deep thinkers, no way. It literally never switches off. It's constantly looping, reflecting, and connecting old memories. Your brain doesn't just, experience a simple moment and let it go. Instead, it dissects it. It searches for hidden meaning long after the actual moment has passed.
And neuroscience backs this up. It shows that overthinkers often have this heightened activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is our reasoning center, but simultaneously, they show reduced emotional regulation in the limbic system. Think about that for a second. You are literally relying on heightened logic and reasoning just to survive. But man, it comes at a steep cost, because having that imbalance makes it incredibly difficult to just let go, surrender to the present moment, and actually feel your feelings.
Psychologists actually have a name for this. They call it cognitive avoidance. Now, you might sit there and think your ability to perfectly decode your friend's weird behavior is some sort of superpower. But quite often, it's really just self-defense disguised as wisdom. By staying super busy analyzing absolutely everything around you, you safely avoid the raw, messy chaos of vulnerability. And sure, you protect yourself, but you also completely isolate yourself from real, genuine connection.
Which brings us to Section 3, the double-edged sword. This is when brilliance becomes a burden.
So on one side of this sword, we have instructional self-talk. There are actually studies of collegiate tennis players showing that when they talk themselves through a swing, it drastically boosts their focus, their self-esteem, and their accuracy. It's incredibly helpful. But then, on the flip side, we have toxic overthinking. This is where that dreaded analysis paralysis sets in. It creates severe anxiety, and it literally freezes our actions entirely, just because we are so terrified of making the wrong choice.
And oh boy, it gets so much heavier when we add empathy to the mix. Deep thinkers usually score really high on something called openness to experience, and they have extremely high mirror neuron activity. What that means is you don't just see someone else's pain, you physically internalize it. And when that happens, it floods your entire system with stress hormones like cortisol, which leads to this profound empathy fatigue and massive emotional burnout. You are basically absorbing everyone else's emotional data right on top of your own. You end up caught in this brutal internal tug of war. You're constantly oscillating between the analytical network, which is totally driven by logic, and the empathic network, which is driven by sensitivity. And science suggests that these two neural systems, they rarely coexist peacefully. When one fires up, the other actively resists. It creates this sort of elegant, beautiful, but completely exhausting chaos that honestly, only the true overthinker ever really feels.
The legendary psychologist Carl Jung explored this idea with his concept of the shadow, those unacknowledged parts of ourselves. And there's a really startling truth here. For you, the deep thinker, your shadow is thought itself. Intellect, when it's stretched to its absolute breaking point, stops being a tool for clarity and just becomes a cage. You actually start fearing what the silence might reveal.
All right, Section 4, Finding Stillness and Coexisting with the Mind.
Okay, I know that last part sounded pretty heavy, but I want you to hear this because it's the absolute most crucial takeaway of this entire explainer. You cannot think your way to peace. I'll say it again. You cannot think your way to peace. Healing does not come from dissecting every single little feeling or analyzing every tiny pause in a conversation. Healing comes from remembering how to just simply exist. And the science on this is actually incredibly hopeful. Thanks to something called neuroplasticity, your brain is not permanently stuck in overdrive. A brain that was once hardwired for fear and hypervigilance and that constant grinding analysis, it can literally reshape its own physical structure. Through new habits, building awareness, and practicing some serious self-compassion, you really can teach your neural circuits to finally rest. So let's break down how we actually do that in the real world. Step 1, cognitive behavioral therapy. CBT is absolutely fantastic for identifying and replacing those toxic thought cycles. Step 2, embodiment. You've got to get out of your head and ground yourself in your physical senses. Just notice the sunlight or actually feel the warmth of your coffee cup in your hand. And step 3 is connection. Practice speaking your truth and maybe even just sharing a quiet moment with someone without feeling the overwhelming urge to over-explain every little thing. Oh, and here is a fantastic, totally practical trick straight from psychology researchers. Instead of that familiar first-person panic, the classic, oh no, I am definitely going to fail this exam, try using distanced self-talk. Basically, you speak to yourself in the third person, something like, Caleb, you are prepared for this. Studies actually show that shifting your inner dialogue to the third person drastically reduces your stress levels during anxiety-inducing tasks. It's like a mental hack that creates instant perspective. I really want to share this incredibly profound quote with you from the philosopher Alan Watts. He said, "The goal of thinking is to eventually realize the futility of thought." Think about that. True wisdom isn't about knowing absolutely everything or trying to hold the meaning of the entire universe in your head at once. It's actually about needing to decode less. It's this beautiful realization that the more you truly understand, the less you feel the need to constantly explain it all. Which leaves us with one final, lingering question to think about. What actually happens when you stop demanding answers all the time and you just begin allowing awareness? Remember, you were never meant to think your way to peace. The absolute deepest freedom comes when you finally trade in that exhausting noise of complexity for the quiet, simple presence of just being. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and I really truly hope this helps you find just a little more stillness.